What's up, everybody? Tim from Tierphone Orbital. As if you didn't already know it was me. But here we are. So, I'm going to talk about a personal build today. And strap yourselves in, because this is going to be a long one. And I apologize in advance. So, this is a demo, walkthrough, guide on one of my most recent personal builds. I don't know what to call this. I guess I don't know what to call it. I don't. Maybe a StarScrap, a ScrapKiller. It's got a viewable crystal chamber. It's got a Graflex top. It's got a Canon X handle. It's like a Frankenstein lightsaber, honestly. So I'm going to talk about my inspiration and what I did from start to finish, because this project evolved so many times over the past few months that yeah, it's one of those things where inspiration really changed for me, and I just kind of went with what I was feeling in the moment, and here we are, right? So enough rambling. So I want to talk about what I started off with. And initially, I mean, honestly, I wanted to do a derelict style hilt for myself. And I started off with doing a render in Shaper 3D. I say this all of the time, but I use Shaper 3D so much. I use it more than Fusion nowadays. So I started off by actually building a render in Fusion or in Shaper 3D of what I wanted the hilt to look like. Initially, this wasn't even here. Like, this crystal chamber wasn't even here. I was going to do a regular derelict style build, and then I thought to myself, there is plenty of room here to put an exposed crystal chamber, so let's try to do that. But yeah, and I just started off with a basic visual guide of what I wanted the hilt to look like, and I find that this helps when I'm doing full customs, just to get an idea of like visualization. And this also helped me in the end, because all of these measurements are accurate. This also helped me in the end because I actually did end up using this control box model that I did in this render. So I was able to export that and get that printed in aluminum. And obviously this crystal chamber I was able to design and spec to size, right? So this is what I started off with. You know, it didn't end up looking like this, but I'm really happy with the end result. So once I had my renders down, I started going about sourcing all of my parts. So I know that I wanted a derelict style shroud. I know that I wanted to have a short grip. I didn't want the hilt to be too long. Sometimes I find that Starkillers can be long, and I know that the derelict style hilts are a little bit shorter. So I like a shorter hilt. I don't like hilts that are too long. So I wasn't sure whether or not I was going to turn out my own grip on a lathe, or use something scrap wise from another build. And it just so happens I have a couple of Canon Y and X flash guns here, so I thought, let's just use it. Why not? Let's use a Canon X flash gun handle. So that's what I ended up doing on this build, and it just evolved from there, right? So let's do an up close. Actually, let's talk about the chassis first. We'll talk about all the components first, okay? So here is the chassis for this build. This is a new chassis that I designed specifically for this hilt. Incredible amount of greebly work. Incredible amount. I say incredible like it's just too much sometimes. So there's a lot of greebly work on this. I'm getting to the point where I'm trying to fill every square millimeter of a chassis with some kind of greebly at this point. So yeah, greebly work all over this thing. I know that I wanted onboard LEDs on this chassis because Why not? So I incorporated some holes on each side of the chassis to put LEDs. So on this side, I've got 2 holes for orange flashing LEDs, and those, you know, they've got holes in them so I can make all of my splices and everything underneath the board. And on the other side, there's a square here. This is a flashing red and white LED that I wired inside of the chassis as well. Plenty of room for a 28mm speaker, and this is a stationary chassis, so all of my whips, my wires come out the top here. Kill switch, battery tray. This is a CFX build, and I hated every minute of it. So this is where the CFX sits. I'll talk about that in a little bit. So I've also got a custom switch assembly. So this is something I actually found this to be the perfect size for more NeoPixels. Shocker. So there's a 2020 NeoPixel strip that slides inside of this housing here. And I sent this off to, let's come down to the bottom. I sent this off to Craftcloud. Now, I've only worked with shapeways in the past for specifically like precious metal prints, like, you know, crystal chamber, like the Goth crystal chamber, some of the stock stuff. I've always done that through shapeways in brass, essentially. And somebody turned me on to Craftcloud. So I sent this particular part, the control box, off to Craftcloud, and
I found this on the web.
Why? Anyway, I sent this off to Craftcloud. I don't know why I can't say that today. I sent this off to Craftcloud, and it was done printing in aluminum in less than a week. So from order to my front door, it was like 7 days. And it was like dramatically cheaper in aluminum than it was with shapeways. So I'm very happy with my experience with Craftcloud as far as aluminum goes. And the brass parts that I did were great as well, but they took just around the same amount of time as shapeways would do in brass, but it was a little bit cheaper, right? So that is, let's go back and do Fusion. So that is the control box, okay? Printed that off in aluminum. This is a crystal chamber that I've been throwing this around for months, for a long time. I've got a frequent client that wanted a custom brass crystal chamber in one of their builds, and I kind of built off of that. This is something that I've been kicking around for a while. So it's very reminiscent of the crystal chambers that we see with the fins and some of the venting here. I tried to put my own little spin on it. These 2 posts on the right here are hollow. I initially did that because I wanted to bring some very small SMD LEDs up through these to have blinking lights at the top of them. I didn't end up doing that in this build, but that's there just in case I wanted to. And again, like with Craftcloud, the fidelity that I got in brass in this part, I printed this off in brass, was fantastic. I mean, even these very, very small tubes here all came out wonderful in brass, and I think that's because they actually cast. They make a cast, like a wax mold, and then actually pour brass into it. So I was really, really happy with this from Craftcloud as well, right? So let's come down to the bottom, and we'll go over the hilt itself. Okay, so here she is. I'm calling this the orbital resonance. Orbital resonance in planetary and astronomy is when 2 planets or 2 planetary bodies are orbiting something, as they come into alignment, that is called orbital resonance. And that's why I went with that name. It also has orbital in it, so no brainer. Right, so let's start from the bottom and make our way up. So this pommel, holy crap, this pommel. This is a full custom handmade pommel. I started off with a regular MHS pommel from the custom saber shop, and I took it on a bandsaw and cut it in half. Then I popped 4 holes and threaded them in the bottom. Every single one of these brass rings is handmade. I don't have a lathe yet here accessible to me easily. So I actually made these by hand. I've got brass plating that I screwed together. Okay, made sure it was very, very tight. Drilled a hole in the center and then formed all of this by hand. I mean, I used a cutoff wheel on my Dremel. I actually, man, I went through a whole thing with these rings, guys. Like it was really difficult to keep them all even, especially doing it by hand. I attached them to a sanding bit so I could turn it on a drill, and then held some sandpaper on it to keep them, to get them, you know, even more uniform. And it's not perfect, right? But again, all by hand. Crazy, right? So they're separated with some washers in between, and those are all threaded to the bottom of that pommel section. This is a Canon X grip. It's a little bit different than the Canon Y. It's got different windows in it. I wanted to keep all of this original text on the grip itself. I really just like the idea of using old parts, and you can still see that it's made from something else, right? All of these windows were designed in Fusion and printed off in translucent resin. This is a translucent red button that I put in there as well to give some shine through from those LEDs that are on the chassis, right? Brass bar. This has also been threaded with some very small hex screws into the body of the grip. Again, handmade. I cut all this by hand, sanding it by hand, and making our way up. This is actually, so this brass piece is from a wind vane from an Obi-Wan Kenobi from Corbanth. So I actually got a replacement part for my Corbanth. It's a replica piece with some stamping on it, and I took off the old one and put it on here. It fit perfectly and just weathered it. It was actually already weathered, and just put it on there, right? So making our way up there is that crystal chamber module. I had that printed in brass from Craftcloud. Super, super happy with how that came out from Craftcloud. It looks really, really fantastic. This upper brass crystal chamber module is actually from Goth. I've had this in my junk drawer forever. I've just never had a reason or a chance to put it in a build. And again, it fit perfectly in here, right? So this is a Graflex 2.0 blade holder that I cut the window out of to make that open crystal chamber viewable, obviously. Making our way around back, here is that custom control box that I had printed off in aluminum. I then weathered it with some aluminum black. This button, it's actually an eBay find. I wanted a different aux button than we're used to seeing. This happened to be perfect size. So that's my aux, and the toggle switch here is my main. This is a small toggle switch. I actually thought about making this an external kill switch, but I ended up making that the main switch for the hilt. This control box is secured with two very small hex grub set screws. They screw into the body of this Graflex. The Graflex shroud or upper Graflex part was weathered by me as well. I taped off the chrome. So this is this brass strip here is actually the brass from the Graflex top. Okay, I taped that off, and the chrome wasn't so good on this Graflex top section, so I was able to actually just scratch off the chrome to give it a little bit more of a unique look, right? Two vents here. These were done by me as well by hand. This was actually done with a Dremel cutoff wheel as well. Underneath that, I've got some gold mesh. This is a brass, brass. That's not copper. That's a brass rod that I specifically put the hole in that control box because I know I wanted to get some either external wiring or brass rod work to incorporate into this control box. So that's a brass rod that I've formed, bent, and secured in place. This is a red button, faux red button, that actually acts as my blade retention. And rather than have a red button, I made a custom resin blue button. If you haven't figured it out by now, like I'm just all about doing things similar, but just a little bit different, just to be a little extra. So instead of red, I went with blue on that. Making our way around the front, this is a Graflex Graflex glass eye from the Graflex shop. I just heat stained that a little bit. There is shine through when the blade is in here, and some regular long Graflex pins, and that's it. Bunny ears, and that's all we got, right? So let's talk about the chassis. Here is the chassis for this build. So I did go over this with a pass of, so this is not buff and rub, this is actually Tamiya gunmetal spray. It's just like a rattle can spray paint. And then I did go back over and painted some of the accents with buff and rub and some acrylic paints, right? Just to make things pop a little bit. This is a CFX build, and I hated every single moment of it. I am not a CFX guy. I'll be the first to admit it. As much as I'd like to be proficient in every single board, every time I install a CFX, I have nothing but problems. So yeah, it wasn't that terrible. I'm being dramatic, but I'm not a CFX guy. I'm not, and I know that I should be, because I do install them for people. I've done like maybe a handful of CFX builds for clients. So I thought it was time to actually have another CFX hilt in my collection. That way I can just familiarize myself with the CFX operating system and get to know it a little bit better, right? So CFX sits there, and that's it, right? So let's put a battery in it.
Red lightsabers. She's a Sith.
Sorry. So another thing I forgot to mention, underneath that crystal chamber, I have got 3 blinking SMD LEDs. These are just random blinking LEDs. I did get this housing, or this wire harness, from Evan Designs. It's a 3 SMD LED wiring harness. It's all wired into one, and I just have to wire it to power, right? And that's it. Nice and easy. So let's do a little demo here. Come down to the bottom. So if you haven't realized by now, I'm just like to be a little extra with things. So there's those neopixels on the control box, crystal chamber, shine through on that glass eye, and here's the onboard chassis blinkies, right?
Sound bank selection.
Disgraceful. Lord Vader. I am a Jedi.
So again, like I'm still getting used to how to program some of the accent stuff. It's, again, like, and this is my own fault. I've always been a coding guy. My background is in IT, and I'm used to like reading lines of code. So Profi has always come like second nature to me. Profi has just always been easier for me. So there's been a great deal of a learning curve for me, especially with the final configuration of CFX. The wiring is fine. I mean, I can wire up the board. It's just like that final configuration and tweaking. I'm still learning, honestly. So that's why, I needed an active daily driver hilt that's a CFX that I can, practice on and make my own tweaks and whatnot. So let's put a blade in it. Why not, right? Another thing I like about the Graflex 2.0 blade holder is it's a 7/8 inch blade. I think I prefer 7/8 inch nowadays. It just looks better to me. It feels better. So there we go. I'm still yet to turn on twist to activate.
That looks.
Exit menu.
Master Quack. Seconds. You're in fire.
So I still need to tweak a lot of stuff, right? I feel like some of my activation.
Sound bank selection.
You're in fire. Ben Kenobi.
some of my activation times are a little delayed. Like I feel like when I activate the blade, swings don't immediately start. It's like a weird delay. So yeah, there's still a lot I need to learn with CFX. And this is like a graphics blade style. I just learned how to do that a couple of nights ago, and it took me like 3 hours to do that. Whereas with Profi, I just find a blade style. People share them all over the place, and you just copy and paste. So yeah, a little bit different. So that's it. That's the orbital resonance from Tirfon Orbital. I will not be doing a run of these. This took too long. It deserves to just be its own one-off and be unique that way. I am in love with this hilt. Even though it's a CFX, I will grow to love it even more as I learn CFX a little bit more. And that's it. So I know like a lot of people were asking, what in God's name did you do to that hilt? How did you do it? So hopefully this helps some people or inspires some people. If anyone has any questions, please don't be a stranger. If you have questions about the Craftcloud process, or if anyone wants tips on designing components, please don't be a stranger. All right. Thanks for watching, everybody. With that being said, may the CFX be with you sometimes.